who are afraid of spiders. When they see them, they scream, they run, they jump on a chair, and then they go get their wife to kill it. So we all have fears. It might not be spiders, but I have other fears. I have fears. You have fears. One thing that God is not surprised by is our fears. Jesus, in the Bible, you see fear not used 366 times. That's the number one command that he gives. It's more than love one another, is fear not. And he's saying something to us here. He doesn't want his people to fear. But we live in a culture of fear. If you want to be afraid, turn the news on and watch it for about 10 minutes. It scares me to death. I think somebody's going to kidnap my kids or I'm going to get murdered. You know, you can look, and no matter what president we have, or Clinton, Bush, Trump, Obama, it doesn't matter. If you go on the news, there's going to be certain media outlets telling you that the world is going to end because of that person. It's scary. My friend Ryan, his wife, one time we were pulling up in his driveway, and his wife was there, and she had been acting, kind of depressed, not kind of like herself. And Ryan and I were away, and I said, "Hey, Ryan, what is wrong with Lindsay?" And he said, "Well, she's been really depressed lately." And I said, "Why?" And he said, this was 2012. He said, she's really scared about December 21st, 2012. And if you remember, December 21st, 2012 was the end of the Mayan calendar, and they were saying that the world was going to end. And it wasn't just a little thing, it was a big thing. It was all over the news. They made a movie about it. It was on the History Channel. It was on Discovery Channel. It was everywhere. They were making money off of it by selling multi-million-dollar condos, saying, hey, if you live in one of these, you can live in it and you won't be hurt. There was a group taking some people a place where, if it happened, they wouldn't get hurt. And off our fears, they were making money, and they were getting ratings. And Lindsay was so crippled by this fear that it was hard for her to do anything, because she didn't want to do anything because she knew that was coming. And what's the purpose of doing anything if I know that the world is going to end? And it was a really dark spot for her. And I love the challenge that God gives in Joshua. He says this to us. He says, I command you to be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged, for your Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Now, it's easy. I want to be this, And it's easy to look at that. But what about when we're going through it? Is it that easy when it's our marriage that is failing? When our fears are in front of us and they've come true? When we go to a doctor and the diagnosis is bad? When your child is sick or struggling? When it's your job that's terminated? What do we do with that? And that's what I want to talk about today. The fears that keep us from living life to its fullest. The fears that keep us from being fully alive. The fears that keep us from being the person God has created us to be. And the first thing I want to mention is that the first thing we need to do is to admit our fears to God. We're going to read in Matthew 14, and I'm going to paraphrase this, and then we're going to go through it verse by verse. But you see in Matthew 14 that Jesus has sent the disciples out on a boat. Okay, there is a storm that comes, and it's a bad storm. It's battering the boat. And Jesus comes out to the disciples by walking on water. They see Jesus, and they're afraid. They think it's a ghost. They cry out in fear. When they realize it's Jesus, Jesus asks for Peter to come out to him, and Peter does. He comes out to him, and then he takes his eyes off Jesus. He focuses on the storm. He starts to sink, and Jesus pulls him out of the water. Okay, so in 26, it says, when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, it's a ghost. They cried out in fear. So part of getting over fears is admitting our fears to God and to each other sometimes. Now, this isn't a natural thing. This is something that's very unnatural for a guy. I don't want to admit my fears. I'm not afraid. She's afraid, but I'm not, And I went to a thing called Lamplighters, and it's kind of like the Emmaus Walk. And there was this one part where we were going into this, I don't know what it was, but it was supposed to be a really special day. It was really secretive, and they kept talking about how awesome it was going to be. So we showed up at a church. It's dimly lit like this church, okay? Come in, and there's this real, there's this music playing, and so I sit down, and then out of all things, out comes a clown, okay? The clown goes up front, and he's doing like miming, or I don't know what he's doing, but here's the thing about me, and I'm telling you this in confidence, and I want you to use it against me. I hate clowns. I'm scared to death of clowns, and I just don't like them. There's people that like clowns. They're called weirdos, and then, like, if you like clowns, you should find a different church, I think. But I just don't like them. So, when I watch this clown up here, okay, the clown goes, and seriously, we're all sitting in this big row, and the clown, it's a he or she, I don't know, but the clown is starting to hug every person in a row. And I realize this clown is going to hug me. So I get up and I leave. One of the guys in charge tells me, we don't leave, you're not allowed to leave. And I said, I'm sorry you feel that way. And then I walked out. So he came out to me and he said, look, man, he said, are you afraid of clowns? And I said, no, I ain't afraid of clowns. Are you crazy? And he goes, listen, we have somebody, they leave almost every time because of the clowns. And my response was, then why do you have them? So anyway, I did tell him, I was like, yeah, I'm afraid of clowns. I don't like making me uncomfortable. And that was hard for me to do. It was hard for me to admit my fear to him. And sometimes it's hard for us to admit our fears to each other. It's hard for us to bring them forth to God. We don't want to do that. It's not natural to admit our fears. And we all have phobias. We show this slide like you see phobias here. And anybody here scared of public speaking? Is anybody here? Okay, not very many people. So fear of snakes. Anybody have fear of snakes? Okay. What about a fear of beards? So anybody have fear of beards? You guys, Amanda has a fear of that beard right there. Fear of heights. We all have these fears, and when we think of fears, we tend to think of someone hurting us physically, or we think of a phobia, right? But there's these other internal fears that we have, these insecurities that we have that we don't want to share with people. These are easy sharing. Scared of snakes, it's pretty common. Spiders, pretty common. But the insecurities that we have, the internal things that we have, sharing those with people are hard. And in 26, we see that they cry out in fear. So I want you to do me a favor, and this might seem strange. I just want you, where you're at, can you just close your eyes? Because I want to ask you something. I want you to focus on what I'm about to say. I want you to think about this as your eyes are closed. What are you afraid of? What are your fears? What are the fears that are holding you back from living the life God intended for you to live? What are the fears that you have keeping you from being fully alive? What are your fears about what God might be doing in your life and the life of this church? What's holding you back from going deeper into more intimate places in your relationship with God? What is that fear? I just want you to think about that just for a second. Okay, listen, look at me. We're going to read further, and we're going to discover that Jesus can walk on water. Okay, we hear about this so much, but that's amazing. It happened then, it's not happened since, but he actually goes into a storm and he walks on water. Jesus can control storms. There was another instance where he was with the disciples, a strong storm come, and he made it go away. And I have been in a really strong storm before. We were on a lake one time. We were on a boat. I had youth group kids there. And I've never had this happen since then, but this strong storm, like a wind, I could see it came over the lake, and it was so bad. There was a kid that jumped in the water without a life jacket, okay? And one of my friends, his name's Gene, the guy that does guitar, he jumped in, okay? He is a Special Forces Marine, jumped in and had a hard time, had to save that person's life. And it took him and I to make that boat go to bring it in. It was terrible, but Jesus can look at that. God can look at that, and he can just make it go away. That's amazing. He can heal without medicine. God said light, and it happened. When I go to the ocean, I'm in awe of how big it is and how awesome it is. And God said, he told that ocean where to stop. He created this world. He knows what he's doing. And I want to ask you something do you believe that our God is mighty today? Can we just say that together? Say it with me. Our God is mighty. Let's say it again. Our God is mighty. Church, do you believe that today? Well, here's the thing. I know you believe it. I believe it. But if we believe that, why do we fear so much? And why are we afraid to bring these fears to God? The person that's powerful, the person that can handle those things. Why are we afraid to do that? When I was in grade school, I was in third grade, okay, and I was being picked on by a sixth grader. And this sixth grader was a big dude. And you're thinking, well, you're in third grade. He's probably 4 foot tall. But no, he was like, in high school, he ended up being like 6'8". So he was a big dude. He'd pick on me every day. And I started doing this thing where I did not want to go to school. I would tell my mom I was sick. I would cry. I remember one night before going to bed, I got a cup and I chewed up a bunch of food and spit it in there and poured orange juice in it. And then in the middle of the night, I dumped it in the toilet and I told her I threw up. And, so she kind of caught on. She was like, hey, I noticed that, something's going on, Chris. Like, what is it? What is wrong? And I said, I finally broke down. I cried. I said, this kid's picking on me, won't leave me alone. He does it every day. My dad said, you walk up to him and you punch him in the face. And then my mom said, no, don't do that. Like, we'll talk to the principal. So that's what we did. We went and talked to the principal and we went and told him, and he left me alone after that. But here's the thing, there was something about actually getting that off my chest and telling my parents about it. This person won't leave me alone. This person scares me. This scares me. There's something about that. And God, in the same way, we can come to Him and we can tell Him, God, this scares me. This is going on in the world. This is going on in my life. And I'm afraid. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And I pray today that you take some time and allow God to reveal to you right now, whatever it is, your fear. Because living with God and living outside of fear is freedom. Number 2 is take the risk. This is a classic step to face your fears, but it's like admitting that you're afraid. It's not natural, taking a risk, okay? Could you imagine if I was sending Trace out for the day and I said, he's my son, he's 11. If I said, hey, Trace, you have a risky day today. I mean, that would be silly, right? Or if I said, Trace, I want you to embrace danger today. Maybe when you're crossing the street, just look to one side before you go across. That wouldn't be natural. It's not something that we do. We don't embrace danger. We don't have risky times. But spiritual growth involves risk, and risk goes hand in hand with fear. Verse 14:29 says, and he said, come, and Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came towards Jesus. So he's walking out. There's a storm. These are fishermen. It must have been a big storm. They were afraid. They know what they're doing out on the water. But that was a big step. Can you imagine to get out of the boat, and you're going to walk on water. You're going to do something that you've never done before. That's a risky step. With Peter, it wasn't just any old risk. It was Jesus calling. If you do something risky just to be risky, that's called being foolish. But if you do something risky because God is in it and you take that step, that's called faith. Courage is doing the right thing even when you're afraid. What is the risk that you've got to take? Maybe there's an apology that needs to be made and it scares you to do that. Maybe there's a hard conversation that needs to happen with you and somebody else and you're afraid. Maybe it's stepping up to the plate and being a husband or being the dad or the wife that you haven't been. And you're afraid because it's awkward. We take the risk. And we know that God's with us just like He is with Peter. And if we fail, we pick ourselves up. So he said, come. When Peter had come out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw that the wind was great, he was afraid. He began to sink. He cried out, saying, Lord, save me. Peter started to sink. It looks like he has failed, but is he a failure? It might have seemed like it, but what about the other guys that stayed in the boat? Sometimes we might try something and we might fail. But we can't be afraid of failure. If you think about people like Michael Jordan, the Wright brothers, going to the moon, all those things were attempted and failure happened. When I was in 11th grade, like one of the scariest things for me, like I'm just telling you about me, and even today, from when I was little to now, is that I would be a failure, like that I wouldn't succeed. You know, when I was in 10th grade, or right before my 10th grade year, I think I've already told you I got saved. I don't come from a Christian family, but I went to church camp, and I got saved there. I met Jesus, and that next year, my whole 10th grade year, I went to church. I really got involved. The youth pastor took me under his wing, and it was awesome. My 11th grade year didn't go so different. And I'm going to share this with you, and you're not going to hear me share this very much because to me now it's a little bit embarrassing, and but it's a part of my story, and it's a part of my life, and it's a part of what God has done with me. So 11th grade, I remember had good friends, my name, no trouble, you know, anything like. So we're out one day, we had went to a game, and then we had went to a dance. We were out on the town, cruising around. People used to do that in cars, you know, and so this person pulls up to us, and we go with them, and they have alcohol, like, in their car. That was the very first night. I remember it like it was yesterday. I remember seeing those people. I remember what the car looked like, the smell. I remember everything. And that, getting drunk that night, sent my life into a whirlwind. I had no idea how bad that was going to mess with me. My whole 11th grade year, like, we went into school, and we would bring alcohol to school, and we would hide it into bottles. We would go home, and we would skip school. I missed a lot of school that year, and we would drink. I got into 2 wrecks because I was with somebody that was drunk while they were driving. It was terrible. And I remember I was going to my friend's house, Ryan's, and as I was going, like, his mom met me at the door, and she said, like, we know what you're doing. And in fact, everybody knows what you're doing, and we can't let Ryan hang out with you till you get help. We can't. This is my best friend. I mean, this is my Christian friend that has helped me. And I remember walking away just feeling so. And she was being a good mom. I do the same thing, you know. But a little bit later, it was about 2 weeks later, like, as I was thinking about this stuff, I thought that I had ruined my life. I was in a deep, dark place, and I thought that God is not going to be able to use me. You know, I have this bad reputation. I've done stupid things. I've missed a lot of school. And I remember in 11th grade, I was watching my sister. My mom was gone. And I went into my room. And that day, I tried to take my life. I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't want any attention for it. Like, I just wanted to die. I did not want to be here anymore. My sister, as I was in there, she realized that something was wrong because she hadn't seen me for a couple hours, you know, and she knocks on the door, you know, and I don't remember any of this. She goes and she gets the neighbor lady. The neighbor lady comes over. She's like 80. She's able to pick the lock and get in my room. And she saved my life that day. I was taken to a hospital. I was there for 2 weeks. I had intensive counseling. I remember a counselor telling me while I was at the hospital, he said, Chris, listen, like, your life is like a book, and this is a chapter, and you're going to turn a page to another chapter. And I remember looking at him in the eye, and because this is how I seriously felt, I said, no, I won't. This is it. Like, this is the chapter. I had messed my life up so bad. And I remember sleeping a lot. I remember being depressed. And then I remember when I got out, I met with my youth pastor. His name was Anthony Moore. And I started to cry and, like, tell Anthony, like, everything that was going on in my life. And I felt like I couldn't go back to church because in youth group, there was this girl, and he would say, does anybody have any prayer requests? And she would raise her hand and say, I do. He'd say, what's the prayer? And she would say, that Chris Slayton's smoking pot, and I just want everyone to pray for him. And I thought, I'd like to punch her. I can't believe she told everybody that. Like, you know, so, but he told me, he said, look, he said, I know what you're going through. Because he had been through the same thing. He said, but here's the deal, like, Chris, your failure does not define who you are. He said, Jesus defines who you are. You don't have to live in fear. You don't have to live in this dark hole. Jesus knows you failed, but he still cares. He still loves you. And the same goes for you. What you have done, where you have messed up, your failures don't define who you are. Jesus defines who you are. And this, I love it that Peter is the one here that stepped out of the boat, because when I read about the disciples, the one that I relate with the most is Peter. Because Peter had like a lot of ups and downs, like a roller coaster. If you remember, Peter chops the soldier's ear off, and then what does Jesus say? We don't do things like that. You put the ear back on. He asked people, he says, who do you say that I am? And who had the correct response? Peter. He said, you are God. And he said, you're blessed for that response. And then a little bit later, he tells, so that's a good thing. And then he tells Jesus, we can't let them crucify you. And then Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. Calls him Satan. You know, Peter, in this moment, he had a lot of ups and downs. But one thing he did was he denied Jesus. He told Jesus, I will never deny you. And he did it 3 times, okay? So, Jesus has been arrested. They're going to get ready to crucify him. And Peter is in this crowd. And they say, aren't you part of the disciples? Don't you know Jesus? And he said no. He did it 3 times. Jesus' eyes met with him. He knew he had failed, and he went out and he cried. But what I like about this story is in John 21, it's in 15. It says this, and Webby just mentioned this during Easter, but let me just go back to it. So when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? He said, yes, Lord. You know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. He said to him again a second time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And he said, tend my sheep. He said to him the third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? He said to him, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said to him, feed my sheep. Listen, Peter had to feel like a failure here. I mean, he denied Jesus. Jesus saw. They met eyes. He cried, you know, and then this is after he resurrects and he's back. And you know Peter still has that on his heart. You know when he sees Jesus, he thinks, I denied him 3 times. I said I wouldn't, but I did. And then who makes this conversation happen? Who goes to who? Well, Jesus goes to Peter. Peter might have been trying to avoid him. Peter might have been thinking, I don't know what to say. It's awkward. But Jesus goes to Peter, and what does he say? He says, look, do you love me? And he says, yes. And he says, then feed my sheep. And he says it again, like, do you love me? And what is he telling him? He's saying, like, do you love me? And he's saying yes. And he's saying, well, listen, get that stuff that happened, get over it, like, and move on. You got to feed my sheep. You got to help me. This is not going to define your life, Peter, but you following me is. And he picked himself up. The next one's embrace the presence of God. If you begin to sink like Peter, there's good news in the gospel. When you sink, God does not. Immediately, Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, you have little faith, why do you doubt? Notice the word immediately, instantly, right then, he got to feel the presence of God. Listen, sometimes when you fail or you have fears, like Satan will use those. He'll say in your ear things like, there's no way that you could help doing this because of what you have done. You are a failure, you are a loser, and you will not be used by God. And I want to say that's a lie. One of my favorite verses is 1 Peter 5:7, because it says this, cast all your cares and anxiety upon the Lord, for he cares for you. So cast all your cares and anxiety upon the Lord, because why? Because he cares for me, and he cares for you, and he knows what you're going through. And the next one is give the praise to God. Lots of times when we conquer a fear, we give praise to Dr. Phil, or Oprah, or Shirley that lives down the road, or whatever. But you see here that 33 says, and those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's son." It ended with worship. They gave the praise to God. I don't know if you keep like a prayer journal, but it's great to do that because in life you can say, like, I'm going through this or I fear this, and you can look back and you can see where God was with you through it, and we give praise to him for that. And I want to close with this. This is a picture of my mother-in-law. Okay? She's a nice lady. Love her. One day, when Courtney and I, we had just started dating, we were going to the same church, and we had a friend that was going to get married. His name was Ronnie Judd. So we were going to Illinois, and we were riding in a van with Jeanette and Junior, and so we were in the van, and I didn't know her well at this time, but I want to tell you something. My mother-in-law drives like a NASCAR driver. Okay? I don't get scared much, but man, she scared me to death that time. I didn't know her very well. I'm like, on the way to Illinois, seriously, nobody was speeding, and it said, "Do not speed, you will get a ticket." Like there were signs, So as she was flying, like she would pass by people and they would look like they could not believe, that she was speeding. I was scared to death. So I go up front, and my father-in-law, Junior, is sitting up front, and he looks kind of like this. Okay, so he wasn't in this seat, but he was asleep. And I shook him. I said, "Hey, how can you sleep?" And he said this. He goes, "If I'm going to die, I don't want to see it coming." And then he went back to sleep. So here's the thing. I trust my mother-in-law drives really good. I trust her. She's very fast, and she can do. But he was joking with me, of course. But I think sometimes with God, why can't we be like that? Why can't we just give him our fears and rest? Why do we worry so much about what's coming? Why do we do those things? God is here, and like we said, he's mighty, and we can give him those fears, and we can have sleep tonight because of it. Listen, I worry. I am a worrier, okay? I worry that I'm going to fail as a husband. I worry I'm going to fail as a father. I worry that my kids are going to hate church sometimes because I'm a pastor, and I worry sometimes as a pastor I will fail. I worry that Chesney is smoking cigarettes in her room. And she's not really. She's only 4 or whatever. I think she's 8. But I worry about my kids all the time. I worry about somebody taking them, kidnapping them, and I have this anxiety about this. And God is there. And I want to say, God, take this. Take it. Let me sleep. Let me rest. God's people need rest. God's people worry too much. God's people are in fear. I don't want to play on your insecurities or anything that's going on in your life. I don't want to pull on your heartstrings. But I want to tell you today, God is here, and he wants to take those. He wants to walk with you through that. He's there, and he knows what's going on, and he wants to hear from you. So today, if you need rest, if there's something that's on your heart, if you're fearful for something, or if you're worried about something, there are people here today that will pray for you and pray with you. And it would be our honor to do that. We want to do that. It doesn't matter what kind of mess you have. It doesn't matter what you're scared of. We want to pray for you. You don't have to tell us necessarily what's going on if you don't want to. If you want to grab a friend and you want to bring them to pray, you can do that. But we're here today. Listen, don't let Satan make you think that you're a failure and that because of that you can't come up and pray with somebody because God would want nothing to do with you. That is not true. It's a lie. 1 Peter 5:7, he cares for you. He wants to hear from you. So we're here today to pray for you on whatever's going on in your life. You can come. Frank's going to be here in front. I'm going to be in the back. If you don't have a church home, we want you to be a part of us. You might think, but you don't know what I've done. I've messed up in my life. I'm too dirty. We don't care. We want you to come. We want you to be a part of God's story, and we want to walk with you. If you've never been baptized, today would be a great day to do that. You could come and you can talk to us, and that can happen today. Whatever you need. I just want you to know that we do this because we want you to know God in an intimate way. We care for you, and so does God, and we want to be here. If you need to pray today, we are here. So I'm going to pray, and Ryan is going to lead. And if you wanted to sit there and think about things, if you want to just look at the lyrics and think about your life, if you want to worship, do that with the understanding that you can still come at any time to pray with one of us.